For more analysis, I'm joined by Professor Robert E. Kelly in South Korea from the Department of Political Science and Diplomacy at Pusan National University. Professor, thank you very much for joining us. The Seoul disaster, can one issue determine the outcome of the polls? Can it swing the election?
In this case, it can, which I think is a big surprise. I think no one would have predicted this even just a few months ago. But the Seoul tragedy has become such a lightning rod. It's become such a gigantic issue in South Korean politics. There have been demonstrations. There have been calls for President Park to resign. You had the parents screaming at government officials, slapping them in public on the TV cameras and stuff like that. I mean, there's been such an impression of sort of government incompetence that this has really become the issue above all issues. Like you said, it has nationalized what should be a local campaign. This campaign should be about schools and school lunches and the mayors and their different issues locally and whatever. And it's not. It's now become, like your correspondent said, it's become a referendum on President Park and her response to the sinking.
I mean, it's not just one issue. There's been a string of safety accidents as well. There's been a lot of public anger over that. President Park's approval ratings have tanked, 61% to about 46% now. Are you seeing this as a clear indication of what's to come for the Saenuri party?
Yeah, I do. I actually think I would be very surprised if Saenuri, which means New Frontier roughly in English, I would be very surprised if Saenuri did not take a drubbing today. I would imagine that would be, I don't know, something like a 10% swing because of the effect of the tragedy. They will lose some mayorships that they might have won otherwise. And this will also be seen, like your correspondent said, as something of a bellwether for the future of South Korea's, or for the future of this presidency. The opposition will probably come out of this strengthened, and they'll push back harder at the national level in the National Assembly and stuff like that. I would imagine it's very, very hard for Saenuri to have a good day today.
Let's talk about the opposition. The New Politics Alliance for Democracy, still fairly young, this new alliance, about 9-10 weeks old. Does its future look bright?
Well, it does now, which is a terrible thing to say, of course, right? But I think it is pretty clear that Seoul has helped their election chances. As you said, it is sort of a new alliance. It's a sort of a union of the traditional opposition party in Korea, which is called the Democratic Party, and a new reformer, sort of popular younger reformer in Korea who's got sort of a lot of media limelight, and they sort of fused and created this kind of fragile alliance, but it hasn't really been tested very well, and this is the big test for it. So again, as your correspondent said, they need to have a really good day. The left needs to have a very good day today. I think people anticipate that. And if they do, they'll come out of it in much better position because, again, they lost so many elections 2 years ago. They took a beating in both the legislative and the presidential election in 2012.
So do you think that they have a good chance of winning the Seoul mayoral election? And if they do, what's the significance of that?
I don't know. Seoul probably. Seoul is sort of a throw-up, right? Because it's like so big. I mean, Seoul is like Greater Seoul represents like 55% of the country. And so Greater Seoul is almost like a national issue unto itself. So my guess is that you will see that Seoul effect there. I mean, like I live in a smaller city. I live in Busan, where local issues actually do matter. There are local issues here we can discuss. But in Seoul, the whole thing is so nationalized that I would imagine you'll see that swing to the left that we discussed, but it won't be a big swing.
Let's talk about the demographic of the voter turnout. Do you think that turnout today will be a key factor?
Well, it should. Traditionally in Korea, high voter turnout favors the left. Korea's older population, people over the age of 50, are Korea's most conservative voters. They're the people that helped put Park Geun-hye in the presidency 2 years ago. It's Korea's younger voters who are sort of more turned off by the system. I see this every day. I teach at a university, and I see a lot of this sort of alienation and stuff like that. So if younger voters actually get out to vote, that will drive up turnout, and younger voters in Korea are strongly on the left, particularly people under 35 are very much vote for the left. So again, if you have voter turnout, if Seoul really drives the rage and the anger and pushes people to the polls, it'll push it to the left, push the outcome to the left.
Professor, political parties very, very focused on the Seoul disaster, but what are some other issues, looking at the big picture, that also need to be addressed by the parties?
Well, one of the big issues, again, it's sort of like Seoul and everything else, right? I mean, this is Korea. Korea is hyper-centralized. It's kind of like France in that respect. In Seoul, everything is sort of nationalized, so Seoul will dominate. But outside of Seoul, for example, where I live, a lot of it is about local autonomy from the central government, about local control of things like tax money and stuff like that. Korea's provinces and cities don't actually control a lot of their own funding, and so there's a constant sort of struggle with the central government over how they're allowed to spend money to do things like refurbish ports, put up new bridges, build schools, airports, things like that. Certainly that's the big issue where I am in Busan. I certainly can speak to that, where the guy who's probably going to win, his big issue has been sort of saving Busan from sort of the size and the growth and expansion of Seoul. It sort of sucks up all the resources and talent from the rest of the country, and that's the big issue down here where I am in the southeast, pardon me.
Professor, it's great speaking to you. Thanks for joining us.